first would seem crazy, like no one was going to listen to us, and they did. Browsers started supporting standards. We said, support them better, please. Thank you.
The web was evolving and growing and changing so much, and there was so much beauty coming out of it. But behind the scenes, what a lot of people didn't realize is there were so many struggles trying to make everything work between each browser.
Web standards was the answer. It's still the answer.
You know, you used to be so excited back then with the web because there's always something new to try and test and play with. And it allowed for such strong individual expression. Impressive Hosting, where we uncover the core tenets of great WordPress hosting. I am your host, Jesse Friedman. Before we dive in, remember to check out impressive.host. It's where you can comment on episodes, ask follow-up questions, and submit questions for upcoming guests. You'll also find all our links to follow, like, and subscribe wherever you listen. And today I'm very excited to say that with me is the godfather of web standards, the peacemaker of the great browser wars, the creator of A List Apart and Event Apart, author, educator, and evangelist of the open web, Jeffrey Zeldman. I think it goes without saying as to why I wanted to have you on the show today. But thank you so much for joining. It's a real pleasure for me. I've been following your career for a very long time. I've been influenced heavily by the work that you've done. And so having you on is a great honor. But thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Shucks. I'm very honored to be here. I really look forward to doing this with you. I'm happy that we're doing it now. And I'm sorry that you may hear sirens in the background from time to time. I live in New York City, and right around the corner is a huge NYU hospital. I didn't want to actually move here because years ago, because I was like, oh, I don't want to be near a hospital, but it's actually been very nice to like walk there several times for emergency treatment. It's like, yeah, as opposed to get me an ambulance,
yep.
I'll just walk around the corner. So, but there is sometimes siren noise.
Yeah, no worries at all. I'm sure John, our producer, will be able to edit out a lot of that. So folks at home may not actually even hear any of it.
Well, beautiful.
Yeah.
In that case,
you,
I'm on top of a mountain surrounded by tranquility.
That's great. So I actually have the pleasure of working with you as a colleague here at Automattic. But you've had a very storied past with the web. But let's kind of start with the present. What are you doing at Automattic? What are you working on?
So at Automattic, I do a lot of writing. I work on two things: AOS, which is the automatic operating system, which is kind of how we think of what we make for people, how it works for them. Are they happy? So it sort of overlaps product a little bit, but it's also, how do we interview people when we're hiring? Are we prompt at giving them an answer? Everything. It's like nothing and everything. It's a very Zen area. And then, and that's no offense to actual Zen, which I just summarized in a very dumb American way. Never mind that. It's somewhat intangible. So coming to grips with that is interesting. The other thing that I work on a lot is employer brand. I got this job. I hadn't worked for anyone for like nearly 30 years. I'd worked for myself, for my own companies. You mentioned an Event Apart, and that was with Eric Meyer, who's basically I hooked up with smarter, more talented people and started companies that way. A Book Apart with Jason Santa Maria, Cachel Ledoux, and so on. But I contacted Matt, who I knew from the conference scene, and we'd had dinner a couple times. And I said, you have an amazing company, but your website isn't telling that story. And he said, I'll hire you, but don't change the website. So I'm finally changing the website, but I've been here 6 years and I'm changing it with other people. And it would have been wrong to do it when I first arrived. And I got to say, I can't imagine working anywhere else in tech right now. Even the worst day at Automattic is better than 99% of tech jobs from my friends who are still employed. And of course, better than my friends who are unemployed and struggling, like, which, you get a few gray hairs and you're just like, you can't code anymore, or no one wants to see your designs, old man, whatever. That's not the case at Automattic. We hire a lot of, I would say, veterans, not only actual veterans of like wars, but veterans of browser wars. Man, I sound bad. That sounds like I'm comparing Desert Storm to the browser wars. I'm not.
Yeah,
Please.
but I think it's okay. I think it's okay to say that
Yeah.
we had lived through that time period where it was very tumultuous for
Yeah.
web designers. It was a
It was.
very hard time period to kind of the web was evolving and growing and changing so much, and there was so much beauty coming out of it. But behind the scenes, what a lot of people didn't realize is there were so many struggles trying to make everything work between each browser. And so for those of you who aren't in my generation or Jeffrey's generation, like knowing where the web kind of came from and how all this stuff came about, the browser wars were really about the and Jeffrey, you could explain this better than I ever could, but it was about these browsers choosing to go in different directions to serve different things in different ways, and
To
without a
compete.
set of standards.
Right.
Yeah, they were right, exactly right.
Okay.
They were
So
competing and
yeah.
trying to go for it. No, you jump in, please.
Okay. So the first website that I made with two partners, was, optimized for Netscape 1.1, because we could make a repeating background tile and do things like we made the Gotham library where these repeating brick patterns, and then we stuck a table cell with like a white background behind it so that we could mask part of it. And then we put a little roof on the top. Um, we didn't know what we were doing. But before Netscape, the web was something I'd looked at a little bit. And I remember having, it's like you hear people who hate each other, like in sitcoms, people meet uncute, they don't like each other, and then they end up married, for 50 years with like grandchildren. It was sort of like that. I looked at the web and went, oh man, this is not going to replace AOL. America Online is so nice looking. And Apple's thing, I forget what it was called. Like those have graphic design, and the web was really, really ugly and primitive. So my friends and I,
I mean, at that time, it was mostly just like gray backgrounds and blue
yeah,
text and
yeah.
just very, very simple.
But that became its own aesthetic, and things like nobody had bandwidth. It would take overnight to download a 400 by 300 QuickTime video or real video. That was, nobody had this, like we're using 14.4 modems. So could you
Yeah.
make something that created an impression, but was very, used very few resources? And Netscape made up these tags, and it was the only browser where so you basically go Netscape or nothing. Like, we're ignorant. You can go like, oh, people on links are going to be screwed. People who use screen readers, even though they existed for a while. So it was this interesting thing where there was a lot of artistry, but there wasn't a lot of usability. There was
Right.
almost no thought to accessibility and inclusion.
Yep.
Um, the W3C, the people who made some of our standards, were thinking about those things, but they were communicating it like eggheads to each other. So it took someone less intelligent than them, me, and I'd been in advertising before this, to go, what's the benefit? Like, imagine you work for an ad agency for Detroit, and someone hands you a brief and it's like, here's how many cubic centimeters this engine has and everything. You got to translate that to whisper quiet ignition or 0 to 60 and, pulse. You've got to translate it to something that makes sense, that people actually care about. And that's all I really did. I talked to people smarter than me, Todd Farner, Eric Meyer, I'm going to blank on lots of people who I'm going to blank on. And it was like, yeah, these early standards exist, but they're not called standards. So we called them the web standards, and we called ourselves the Web Standards Project. And we were just a bunch of doofuses. but we could see that it was, the reason there were browser wars. Sorry, man, I sound like I'm high. I'm not high, by the way. I'm just happy to be talking to you.
The reason I'm sitting here quietly
Yeah.
is because I'm just enjoying the conversation. So like you
Okay.
go down as many tangents as you want.
Okay. But you said, how did we get here? And it was very simple.
Right. How did we get
People,
here? Yeah.
people made software, and software companies compete. So, one visual tool supports SVG and another doesn't. Oh, darn, we should support SVG. Yeah, but you know what you can do with ours? You can make a timeline and animate things with ours. So then, so like Photoshop versus, I forget what their competitors were back then. Because there was a time when Photoshop wasn't the be all, and again, it's not,
Yeah.
these days, it's not necessarily the first tool a lot of web designers turn to,
I
but
actually opened Figma for the first time and started working in that this
are you
week.
enjoying it?
I actually am. Yeah. From a web building perspective, it is quite nice. Yeah.
How are you
Yeah.
onboarded?
What's funny is that everybody at Automattic uses Figma. So every single
Right.
time that somebody sends me a comp, I get dropped into Figma.
Right.
And so I've had some kind of interactions with it at some level for quite a while. And then I'm thinking about the new framework for the way in which the WP Cloud website's going to work. And so I started actually wireframing it in Balsamic, and then I tried Miro. And then I was like, you know what? Let me just try Figma as a way to kind of, and all of a sudden I found myself designing instead of wireframing because it's very intuitive. It's very easy to use. And so I didn't really have much of an onboarding, actually. It just kind of works the way you'd expect it,
It
which
works
is kind of the beauty of it.
like Sketch, and like my understanding is it's pretty similar to Sketch, and it's pretty similar to XD, which was sort of like a poor person's version of Sketch. I started by coding. I did my designing in code. I did my designing in HTML in plain text for a long time, because it was
Me
what you
too.
could actually do was very primitive, but you could make incredibly beautiful things by saying, this area is going to have this background color. I'll put a wall there. Oh, I know. I'll put a little ping at the bottom that sort of creates a gradient like before. But anyway, what happened was Netscape browser existed. Everyone went, this was the 90s, mid 90s. You'd go to Computer Store or Radio Shack or something. You'd buy this $40 CD-ROM. You'd sit there, it would have to be optimized for your platform. Then you'd plug it into all that. And so Microsoft went, I know I'll tell you exactly what happened. Netscape palled up with Sun Microsystems and said, Windows is over. We're going to have this combination of the web browser and these open standards, and everything's going to be great. And that's what Bill Gates woke up from his nap and went, oh, are you? All right, let's make a browser too. And let's make it different with better features. Not necessarily, but that's what he would have hoped. And for like,
So that was the birth of the blue E on the desktop.
and the browser wars. And not only
Yeah.
were they incompatible with each other, they were incompatible with themselves. So the way CSS wasn't supported at all in Netscape 3, it was in Netscape 4, but differently than how it worked in IE. IE 3 supported CSS. That was the first time people went, oh, okay, maybe Microsoft has something here. Like, to some degree, Microsoft won the browser wars because they had a monopoly on the operating system, and they used that. The European court found that they abused it. Clinton also prosecuted them for what do you call anti-competitive monopoly. I forget the exact.
Yeah.
But
Antitrust.
but nothing really happened in America because we always kind of like the capitalists, So I think when I saw IE3, they did early support of CSS, and I saw that, and it was so much better than what you could do with tables and font tags. I just went, okay, this is the future. And a couple of friends, just some other, I would say, not the most popular kids in high school. Some of we were the people who cared about this, and we found a way to translate. And the browser companies listened. At first, it seemed crazy, like no one was going to listen to us, but then they did. Browsers started supporting standards. We said, support them better, please. Thank you. And we wouldn't have anything that we have. We wouldn't have the iPhone. Steve Jobs wouldn't have been able,
Right.
wouldn't have been able to say, because before there were apps, it was just, we have this internet device, right? But whoa.
Well, prior to that, like the way in which you described it, and it's funny because I have to keep reminding myself. My daughter is 17 years old, and I have to remember that her vision for the internet, her view of it, is very different from what I've experienced growing up. And so, for anyone at home who's not maybe getting it, the browser wars, it was a competitive state in which these browsers were trying to take market share of the people using their browsers by releasing these new cool features and things like that. And what that ended up meaning is that the web designer would design something, and if they didn't take the care to evaluate the way it looked in every one of these different browsers, it was very much like taking the time to design. And, just for a second, the web at that time, and still does, took its page from publishing, right? Like magazine layouts highly
Absolutely.
influenced the way in which websites were designed back then.
Roger
And
Black,
so,
Roger Black, who designed Time and Newsweek, was one of the first big web designers, and founded a multi-million-dollar company, dedicated to it. And his principles were good, like type hierarchy, all the stuff that people who sort of blundered into it didn't necessarily,
not to mention the stuff that we take
yeah,
for granted today.
right,
Yeah.
right.
I mean, even just the term below the fold, people may not
Yeah,
recognize this, but below the fold is referencing the fold in the newspaper that everything above that was what you would see when it was sitting on the rack at the store. And below the fold is what you'd have to do to actually flip it over. In this case, in the web, you'd scroll.
it was based on your client's screen. So whatever the
Right.
dimensions of your client's laptop, you go, I want that above the fold. And be like, okay, it's above the fold for you, but for someone at a different resolution, it won't be. It's like, no, I want,
Right. And
yeah,
then the idea that that even makes sense to them is so hard. But this would be very much like designing a magazine layout, expecting to have it printed on a very specific size of paper. And then all of a sudden, everyone is consuming your magazine in different views and different
right,
formats.
right.
Sometimes text wouldn't even be visible, images would be missing, it was just a mess. And so your work and others who contributed to it to standardize these things had such a major impact on the internet as a whole. I don't think people necessarily recognize that who haven't lived in it themselves, because you end up taking these things for granted. You kind of grow up in it, and you don't even understand how you got to where you are today.
Sure.
But I came up in, I built my first website in 98, coding first, as you said, not designing first, but coding first, because it actually closed the gap. It helped you to not get excited about designing something that was not even possible to be built into a browser. I can't tell you how many times, a designer would hand me something and I'd be like, we're not going to be able to do that. We're going to have to do it a little bit differently. But in like the early 2000s, and in like, we got to like 2010, we still had this lagging behind old browsers kind of issue where you remember IE5 and IE6 were
Absolutely.
like the last ones to cause us the most amount of pain. And I keep going back to this anecdote where there was this website. It was so smart. They had this e-commerce platform, and they would detect that you were in IE6, and they would charge you a tax. So if you bought a product off their website, it would cost you an extra dollar because you were on IE6. And they
Wow.
would say to you, if you would like to avoid this charge, go use a modern browser like Firefox. And they would actually link to Firefox. And it was a way for them to justify the extra work that was involved in making that website actually function on IE6.
But, and I get where they're coming from, but like one of the things when we'd say, well, get a modern browser, some people would say, I can't. I live in a poor
Right.
country. I can't. I'm borrowing my grandfather's laptop. Or I wouldn't be your grandfather probably, but you know what I mean. Um,
Yeah.
at the beginning, what people don't know about the browser wars, unless you were around, we would make websites that say, click here if you're using Netscape this, click here if you're using Netscape that, and so on and so forth. And then
Yeah.
the advance of like using JavaScript to detect, to basically read the metadata at the beginning, and it would say what it was
Oh yeah.
optimized for, or okay, that was terrible. And then um, it was a big deal to get people to stop, and there's still sites being built where they test for browsers instead of capabilities. And the reason that didn't work is that, like, Opera was perfectly capable of displaying a site, but the site had code in it that said, oh, if this isn't IE6, you can't come in. So Opera would I forget the word that we used to use, but it would basically, it was like a cloaking agent or a
It would mask
disguise.
the headers, right? To
Yes,
kind of like
and it would
ghost
change.
itself as Internet
It
Explorer.
announced itself as Internet Explorer, and
Right.
then the server would go, oh, I can serve this now. And then maybe it didn't work,
Yep.
maybe it did. And if it didn't work,
Right.
so all this complexity. And at the beginning of my design career, I kept going for super simple. And I would tell, like, when clients really wanted that stuff, I would go, you can't really do that on the web yet. You can't reliably. And this is like 2003. So I was the kind of like, why would you hire me? I don't know. But I was the kind of designer who would say, we can't do that on the web, or it's going to look different. Is that okay with you? And
Yeah.
here's,
Right.
um,
Well,
and
simplicity's hard, right?
simplicity is hard, and
Yeah.
incompatibility is hard. Imagine making a film, but projectors aren't standardized. And so in one thing, they're moving a little too slowly and you can see stuttering. And in another one, they're speaking with high voices and moving too fast. It was all stuff like that. Um,
Yeah.
and then, of course, people would go, I use the only browser that matters. And then for a long time, it's a Chrome. It doesn't, well, switch to Chrome. And I still see stuff like that. And the government used to be really bad about that until I would say the last 5 to 10 years, when a lot of really great UX people went into government work specifically so that the government could actually serve the people. And if you wanted to pay your ticket online or register for it, to get your new passport online, it would actually work, and it wouldn't go, sorry, you're using Windows 11. This only works in Windows 3.1 or whatever. I mean, because the other thing is
Right.
people run out of money and they stop updating. So all of that was
Yep.
terrible. Web standards was the answer. It's still the answer. And I struggle now, not at work because we don't do this. And but I struggle now because I see so many platforms that being touted as the next, and now AI site builder, and it's amazing. And we even have one ourselves, but I worry, like, yes, it's building, but is it doing it the way Front Page would have done it? Treating everything as sort of like just putting everything inside a span and putting that span inside a div and having a million class names, and there's no coherent underlying semantic structure. So selling people on a coherent underlying, that became my job. Once the browser companies were on board with standards, it took another 5 years for us to persuade designers. And everybody loved Flash. I used to hate my life. I would go, my friends are designing such beautiful stuff, and I just got a 2-column layout to work in CSS on 4 browsers. I'm bushed. That's really all I can
I
say.
cut my teeth on Flash websites. Actually,
Cool.
I
Interesting.
started a freelance business in high school. All my other friends were, serving ice cream at a local shop, making money on the side. I was building websites in a small town on Cape Cod. I moved there after I grew up in New York, so you and I actually have a little bit of overlap there. But it was an antiquated old town where everyone was behind the time. So even in even now they still don't have as many websites as you think. Like, businesses just aren't online as much. So it was a green field for me. I was able to build so many websites for so many local businesses in that area. And but then my first real job was at a company that built websites for car dealers, and we used Flash for everything. And it was an
It
interesting
wasn't a
thing
commerce
because
site, right? It was more of a look at our great new
no,
models.
no.
Or were you actually buying the
Yeah,
car online?
no, you weren't buying the car, but what you were doing is we had so much content that was actually highly valued. It was great to have in Flash. So, for example, people may not know this, but like back in those days, the manufacturers didn't provide you with the 360 spins of vehicles. So every
Right.
single make and model, I actually built those for a company that we were later acquired by, ADP, which then distributed them. So if you ever shop for a car between the years of like 2005 and 2007, and you spun the vehicle, I probably made that spin.
That's a really cool
And so
story.
it was stuff like that for Flash. It was so helpful because those types of animations and interactions that users could have was not, it was beyond JavaScript at that time. It was not something that you could do clients,
Absolutely.
well, technically client side, but
Do
it
you remember
required an
Jason?
installation. You had to,
Yes. You had to download and install software in order to use the
right,
web.
exactly. Yeah,
Do you
yeah,
remember
yep.
Jason Kotke before he was Kotke the blogger? Initially, I met him on a mailing list of like web designers, and he made this great satirical site where you could change the color of a Volkswagen Beetle by clicking, and the colors were
Yeah,
based on the first iMacs. The like the you know
right.
first there was just one color of
Yeah,
iMac, Bondi blue, and then there were like 5 colors that Steve Jobs picked out, or
yep.
and so Kotlin made like you could change the color, and it was just using JavaScript and I guess pings, maybe, colored
It was
pings or
probably,
something.
yeah, maybe some. I remember we used to do in the past, we'd cut out transparent pings and then change the color of the, like the div in the background so that
Right.
it appeared like a mask over it. Crazy stuff like that. Because it was funny because each time the browser unlocked something new, like transparent pings were huge. Then you could do like shading and things like that. So you could add depth of field, but then you were just changing the color behind the scenes. Like it was stuff like that that really you used to be so excited back then with the web because there's always something new to try and test and play with, and it allowed for such strong individual expression. And it's funny because we talk about this on this podcast a lot. The fact that the web is becoming so much more sterile. It seems like the internet is as a whole is so much more focused on getting you to fill out a form, getting you to sign up for a newsletter, getting you to buy something or click on an ad. That it's almost like everything kind of looks the same, feels the same. It doesn't have that weird old web feel as much anymore. And I think a lot of that has to do with social media. I actually shared a video internally at Automattic. I don't know if you saw it, but it was it was the perception of the web through the youngest generation, my daughter's generation. And the thing that was most intriguing to me was that the way in which this person was describing the internet was by reminding people that Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and Instagram is not the web. Those are
Right.
closed source, walled gardens that are algorithmic driven, but they are not an expression of the web. The web is so much more. And the way in which it's described is like there's this whole other internet with websites that you can go and you can see the way in which people describe things differently and talk about things and express themselves. So I personally am on this like path of like getting us back to that. I want us so badly to return to a place where we're not relying on Facebook, and that WordPress can be that foundational layer
Absolutely.
underneath of it because it gives you the ability to express yourself any way you want to.
Absolutely. And that was the other thing that appealed to me well, first of all, I was flattered when I was offered a job at Automatic. Um, Also, I'd been chasing clients to get paid for 30 years, and
Yeah.
I'm not getting any younger. And I was like, a steady paycheck might be a good thing or a change. And I was really good at starting things. I was really good at ideas. I can make a book. I've made books. I've made websites.
Yeah.
Making a business that impresses me, and people who are good at that impress me, and I'm not good at that. I have,
Well, freelancing, I think it helped me to gain somewhat of an entrepreneurial spirit. You had to hustle, you had to learn. But you just made me remember something, and I can remember exactly where I was. You wrote something online. I don't remember if it was on Zeldman.com or if it was on Twitter or something else, but you you gave me permission, you didn't even know me, to fire a client. And it was this idea that it blew my mind that because you mentioned that freelancing was feast or famine. You had to bring in these clients, you had to bring in the work or you weren't going to get paid. But at some point somewhere I read something that you wrote, and you basically said it's okay to fire a client if they're not working, if the relationship isn't right, if you're not helping each other, you're not serving each other's needs, whatever it might be. And that actually changed for me a huge thing. So it's complete tangent, but I just wanted to thank you because I
What
do
did it do for
specifically
you?
remember
How did you change?
it gave me peace of mind, honestly, because it allowed me to shed the weight of some of the more frustrating clients I ever had. And it helped me to grow my business, honestly, because I wasn't realizing it at the time. Because, sometimes it's easier to deal with the devil that you know, and you end up, having these prolonged relationships that can be super frustrating and the time suck. And you don't want to bill them for every minute because it just creates more frustration and more headaches. And, but at the same time, you're not creating a mutually beneficial solution, partnership there. And so feeling better about being able to say, hey, this isn't working out, I'm going to fire you, you know, it changed everything because it was always me working so hard not to get fired by the client. And
Yeah,
when I
no,
was
that's
able to
a,
switch the paradigm, it was huge. It was
like if
an enormous thing for me.
someone who's stays in an abusive relationship because they don't feel they're worthy of love or because they're used to it or because they think
Right.
it's all they
Yeah.
deserve or whatever. We all have stuff
Yeah.
like this. And then
Hmm.
realizing it's okay to be without a partner. It might be better to be without a partner than to be with the wrong person. Better for you, better for them. If there's kids, better for the kids. Like, but that's hard. Um, there's a way to fire clients though too. There's like a couple things. One is you do it respectfully. You do it as a
Yep.
service. You say, I think your vision is very compelling, but it doesn't, I'm not sure it aligns with what I'm best at. I feel like
Yeah.
my particular skill set is X and you need Y. So and so, who I've worked with and I believe you can trust, might be a good person to talk to. Shall I effect an introduction? And that way you're basically saying, I know you're not happy. I'll be brave about this rather than take your money and have you be unhappy and have me, eat my heart out. I will find you someone who will work for you better. The kind of thing you wish for if you're ever in a relationship you want to get out of and you're like, man, why can't they just fall in love with Joe over there? And, I'll go, oh, honey, that's okay. Like I would have fantasies like that when I was in a relationship that wasn't working for me, that somehow miraculously, because I didn't want to hurt anybody. That's another
Sure.
thing too. You can feel like, I don't know. I think there's people who treat business like business and they're very cold. And my hat's off to them. But I always had to fall in love with my clients and have a real relationship or a friendship at least.
I was going to say, I think you're an incredibly compassionate person, and it shows in the way in which we converse here. But you're not going to remember this, but you and I met in 2008 at an event apart, and at the time, I had the blue beanie on in November for Web Standards Day. I had your book. I idealized you as someone. I never cared about real celebrities. I literally bumped into Bruce Willis one day, didn't care. But getting to meet you, getting to meet Eric Meyer at that same conference, those were huge moments for me. They were very, very influential. And I followed up and I sent you an email afterwards telling you about some ideas that I had going on. And I shared a web design that I had. And it was zero expectation to ever hear back from you. But you wrote me this email back and you explained to me about like you had not only critiqued my work, which I think a lot of people might have been like, oh, he doesn't like my work. I saw it as, oh my, he took the time to tell me where I can improve. And that's got to cost X amount of dollars per hour if I were to hire him. And he's just doing this out of, the kindness of his heart. But you also just started a conversation with me, and we had bounced around ideas and shared emails over the years and stuff like that. And so like, it's just always been so amazing to see that from you. But I think it kind of comes from a place deep inside of you that has been expressed through your work as well. So, it leads us into this conversation about something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is like, we talked about in the past designing with the intent to delight, right? Um, and how the web was meant to like really, you have these opportunities to really make people feel special or heard or listened to or whatever. And I think that the reason you've probably seen a lot of success with your work is because you've always thought about that end customer and the ability to delight them. And that doesn't come from a place of capitalistic interest. It comes from a place of wanting to give a great experience to a customer and to give them back something. And so now we talked a little bit about the web becoming sterile. I think we need to be shifting towards a place where we're more empathetic in our design, and that we're thinking and putting ourselves in the shoes of our end customers, and getting away from trying to force fit them into a sign up flow and do whatever we can to get them to sign. Like, I can't tell you how much it drives me absolutely nuts if people want my personal information before they give me any information in return. One of the things that I've been saying for a long time now is this idea of fair trade marketing. If I'm going to give you something, I want something in return. If I'm going to give you personal information, you need to personalize my experience. If I'm going to give you, the business industry that I'm in, do something with it. Don't use it as a metric just to sell me later. Do something to actually improve my experience, so that, when I say I'm an electrician trying to build a website, stop trying to show me, ice cream shop websites. Show me something about electricians.
And stop
Anyways, long story short,
and stop selling. Hey, this electrician, blah blah blah. Like a mailing list to other stop selling your sucker list.
yeah,
Don't add me. There are companies that make more money from that than from providing any
right,
service, and that can be very seductive. The dark side is real, right? Like, you mean I can make $20,000 within the blink of an eye? Yeah, okay, screw them. I don't care why you came here. It's like the people,
right,
and now with what do you call private equity, and just what's been happening in business the last 10 years, and how it's set up the current political scene, where actual working people have almost no chance of surviving. Like everything's for the benefit of the very few, and it just keeps getting worse and
right.
worse.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's that desire to extract rather than to give back. And, this whole podcast is about hosting, so I guess we should try to turn this towards it for a little bit. But I think hosting companies, are in a unique place where people are trying to build an experience, and they're trying to launch something, which gives them the opportunity to share so much information about their goals, who they are, what they're trying to do. Hosting companies, I think in general, could be doing a much better job of understanding that, and then giving back to that customer an experience that helps them to be successful, that's tailored to them, that's more personalized to them, and stop focused so heavily on how fast can I get you to pull your credit card out, but much more focused on how do I help you to get something going or get something live, be successful. And you mentioned
like
before a little bit of concern with AI. And I have a response to that, but my producer John, he's gonna kick my butt because we're almost at 40 minutes, and these episodes we try to keep them at 30. So is it all right, Jeffrey, if I ask you that we take a break here and we come back and continue this awesome conversation and talk a
yeah,
little bit about AI and empathetic
yeah,
design?
that sounds perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. You'll see more of Jeffrey Zeldman and myself in a bit. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Impressive Hosting, where we uncover the core tenets of great WordPress hosting. Do you have a follow-up question for today's guest, thought or comment on anything we talked about, a future guest suggestion, a hosting horror story? What do you think makes great WordPress hosting? All your comments shape this show. Drop them on impressive.host. We also appreciate you following us on social media and subscribing to the podcast on your favorite platform. Finally, do check out our list of open source projects that need support at impressive.host. Whether it's code, community, or cache, you can make a difference. See you next time.